Chancellor, the public inquiry into the Southport murders announced by the Prime Minister will tell us some more. But would you accept that the system is failing? It failed the little girls and it failed everybody who is actually still at risk?
I mean, it's appalling what happened in Southport and the evil, cowardly acts of that man. The impact will be felt forever by those families, and it's right that there's now a public inquiry to establish what on earth went wrong. The man was referred 3 times to prevent. He'd been found carrying a knife on multiple occasions, and he'd attacked a boy he was at school with, and yet he was able to slip through the system. And so it is absolutely essential that we learn lessons, not just to provide some sort of understanding for the families of who've lost their loved ones, but also to stop anything like this ever happening again. And no stone should be left unturned in that inquiry.
We, as you say, will learn more, but this man made ricin. He had an Al-Qaeda manual, in themselves both terrorist offences. No one can see what's in his mind, but was it a mistake for the Prime Minister to imply last autumn that people who were asking whether there might be a terrorist element here were either endangering a prosecution or had some underlying prejudiced motive, or both?
So I think it's really important that when a government speaks, when ministers speak about something before there's been a trial, that people are very careful about the words that they use, because if a government of any colour did anything to prejudice a trial, then that minister would never be forgiven. And so ministers do have to use words with caution. I think part of what this public inquiry needs to establish is when Prevent look at things, what they regard as terror, because my understanding of this case is because they didn't think that the killer had an ideology, that therefore he wasn't at risk in the same way that somebody who might have an ideological motive might. But just because you don't have an ideological motive doesn't mean that you can't be a mass killer and incredibly dangerous.
Well, indeed.
These are things that the public inquiry must look at.
Indeed, they'll study all of that and exactly what ideology means and so on. But I guess the question I'm really asking is one that was asked by the Independent Review of Terrorism. Essentially, police and ministers ruled out terrorism, or warned that terrorism shouldn't be seen as a motive here. The Independent Reviewer of Terrorism said this week, Jonathan Hall, that it would have been better for ministers to be more transparent about what they did know and didn't know, and that might have headed off the rumour-mongering and the consequent violence we saw on the streets.
I think it's really important that ministers take advice from the Crown Prosecution Service and from police and don't say anything to prejudice an inquiry. That's incredibly important. The killer will now spend the rest of his life in prison, and it is really important that ministers didn't do anything ahead of that trial that could have prejudiced it in any way at all.
All right, let's turn to, if you like, more conventional territory for you. When you said this week we need to be more positive in our outlook, more like Donald Trump, did you forget that America's GDP was growing at the end of last year while ours was just flat?
Well, we need
He's got something to boast about.
Well, and we've got loads of stuff to boast about in our country. We've got some of the best businesses, some of the most amazing entrepreneurs, some of the highly skilled workers in the world, some of the best universities in our country.
We haven't got 3% growth, though.
No, and we haven't for a long time.
Like
Trevor, we haven't for a long time. For more than a decade, our economy has flatlined. And I know that we need to go further and faster in delivering that growth, exploiting the massive opportunities that we have as a country. And as a government and as British businesses, we need to be championing Britain. And that's what I was doing this week in Davos, shouting on a world stage about everything our great country has to offer, and saying to investors and saying to some of the biggest companies in the world, come to Britain and take another look at Britain, because under this government, we are removing the barriers that have stopped you investing and getting stuff done in Britain for too long. I'm really excited, and my enthusiasm and excitement for what this country has to offer has never burned brighter. And I'm determined that we're going to go further and faster in delivering that growth so that we can improve the living standards of ordinary working people in our country.
In the autumn, you and the Prime Minister were channeling Eeyore. How come Tigger's suddenly turned up? What's changed? The growth pattern is flat on its back still.
When I
Our
became...
forecast is... It's still lower than anybody else's in G7, or nearly.
Oh, well, wait a second.
Any other big country.
No, that's not true. The IMF revised up the forecast for the UK just over a week ago. They only revised up in the G7, the UK and the US. We're now predicted this year to be the fastest growing major economy in Europe. So let's not talk our country down. There's loads to be positive about, and others are saying those things. But look, Trevor, when I became Chancellor, I inherited a difficult situation. I had to put the public finances back on a firm footing. We've seen what happens when governments lose control of the public finances. We've now taken the action to put those public finances back on a firm footing, and now the focus is all on economic growth because we want to raise living standards of people in our country.
When we spoke before, the focus was on ordinary working people. What do you think ordinary working people would have made about the fact that you went to Davos, the sort of capitalist chinwag, and you decided that you were going to listen to non-DOMs, millionaires, and row back on what you said you were going to do, which was to take money from them?
It's a basic principle for me that if you make Britain your home, you should pay your taxes here. And under Labour, you will. Even the previous government, the Conservatives in the end...
But not as much as you said they would.
No, that's not true. No, Trevor, we haven't changed any expectations about the amount of money we're going to bring in. What we've made some changes to this week is something called the Temporary Repatriation Facility, which means that very wealthy people in this country can bring money in from overseas without paying punitive tax
Which is not what you were going to do before.
Well, no, we're raising exactly the same amount of money that we set out in the budget. We're getting rid of the concept of non-domicile in the tax system so that if you make Britain your home, you pay your taxes here. But we also want to be a welcoming place.
So if I may just be clear about this. So you're saying, all those people say this is a watering down because 11,000 millionaires have left the country. You're saying it's not a watering down at all. It's just as tough as it was before.
Well,
You said at Davos you'd listen to what you call the non-dom community and you're changing things. Are you changing or not?
Yes, what we're doing is making it easier for people to bring money in from overseas to the UK without facing punitive tax rates, because we want Britain to be a place that's bringing in inward investment. So this, under these changes, we're still getting rid of the concept of non-domicile in the tax system. If you make Britain your home, you'll pay your taxes here. The changes we're making is if you're bringing in money from overseas, you won't be hit, as you are today, with punitive tax rates.
I'll tell you why this matters. It's not nitpicking. You are making a change in response to what you would say is the complaints from that community. Since you came to office, you imposed 40 billion quid's worth of taxes. You told farmers they'd have to pay more inheritance tax, and you took away the winter fuel allowance. You can see that this week, people watching you in Davos, amongst all these millionaires, and you saying, well, I've listened to this community, are wondering why you can't listen to the farmers.
Well, I had to raise significant sums of tax in the budget to make sure that the public finances stacked up. And people would never forgive me if... Wait a second. People would never forgive me if this government lost control of the public finances in the way that Liz Truss did and the impact that had on interest rates and borrowing costs. But the changes I've made around non-DOMs,
who are you
Trevor...
raising it from?
The changes I've made on non-DOMs are not costing taxpayers a single penny of money. That's the difference here.
But they are the changes, the inheritance tax changes you're making will cost farmers.
Yes, but in the most recent year, 40% of the benefit of agricultural property relief went to just 7% of estates. In fact, just 37 estates in our country benefited more than £100 million of tax relief. That is not affordable and sustainable, and that's why they've made those changes. But agricultural property still only faces half of the inheritance tax rate that anybody else faces. I think that's a fair and proportionate change.
We could discuss this again. As you know, the small farmers don't agree with that.
The small farmers won't be affected.
They don't agree with your analysis
of this. This is data from the tax office that you will only be affected, essentially, if you've got an estate worth of £3 million.
I've discussed this with you and your colleagues. The point I'm really driving at here is that for some people, this concession, let's call it that, to non-DOMs contrasts with what you're doing to other people. And this morning, you've now written that you're going to tackle the spiralling benefits bill by taking away people's driving licences, getting people off the stick. Now, this may be justified, but many working people will think that non-DOMs get sympathy and people on welfare get tough love.
This is about tackling fraud in the benefits system, and quite right too. If people aren't entitled to benefits, they shouldn't be getting them. And at the moment, we waste billions of pounds as a country every year in giving money to people who aren't entitled to it. And what we're saying is if you're ripping off the state and ripping off other taxpayers, we will take money directly out of your bank account and you risk losing your driving licence. So proper penalties for people who frankly, are getting money that they are not entitled to, and we'll crack down on that. By the end of the forecast period, we're going to be raising more than £4 billion a year by cracking down on fraud and error. For too long, this has gone unchecked. And I think most working people would say, absolutely spot on. I don't want to pay my tax to subsidise somebody who's not entitled to support.
All right. Let's talk about your plans to kickstart growth. Is it time that the third runway at Heathrow was cleared for takeoff?
I'm not going to comment on speculation.
Why not?
Because that's speculation, and we'll set out our plans in our own way. But the reforms we've set out this way...
OK, let me put it another way. Would you like to see this third runway happen?
Trevor, you could ask it in lots of different ways, but I'm not going to comment on that speculation. We'll set out our plans, but you've seen this week what the Prime Minister has announced, what the Environment Secretary has announced, that we're going to make it easier to get stuff built in Britain, whether that's transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure, or indeed housing. For too long, governments have backed the blockers and not the builders, and that's going to change.
But you see, this is exactly the problem. I understand the slogan, builders, not blockers, and all the rest of it. I ask you, would you support one of the biggest builders' projects that there has been, that has been on the stock since 1946? And I say to you, do you want this to happen? And what you then say is, I can't tell you.
Well,
that is actually the history of this.
We'll make our...
Oh, there is an announcement coming.
We'll make announcements about investments when we are ready to.
When might that be?
But already, since we got elected, we've signed off expansion plans at City Airport and Stansted Airport to make it easier and cheaper for British families to go on holiday and to welcome investment.
I know you want to deflect from Heathrow, but the point is, if you don't make a decision now, if you made a decision this week, it still wouldn't be till 2040 that things in operation. Why are you hanging about? You keep telling me it's urgent and we're going to take out all the blockages and so on. Why not just say, I'm the Chancellor, I want it to happen?
We'll make announcements about policies when we're ready to, with full collective ministerial responsibility. But I think you can see from this government the thing that we have signed off...
Not everybody in the Cabinet agrees, then?
We will make our announcements when we're ready to do so. But let me be clear, already this government have signed off housing developments, a data centre infrastructure to support the AI and tech industry. We've supported onshore wind developments. We have supported a number of developments to get our country growing again. Decisions that were on the desks of previous ministers, but those decisions were either blocked or stalled. And as a result, we haven't had the economic growth and the investment that our country deserves to create those good jobs, paying decent wages.
Let me just have very one quick go on something allied. People at Gatwick have been banging on for years that they want a third runway. That would expand... Second runway, I beg your pardon. That would expand capacity. That would promote growth. Shouldn't they have it?
Gatwick and Luton have both got planning applications in at the moment. The decisions will be made on that. I can't comment on that because they're quasi-judicial decisions, but both Gatwick and Luton decisions will be made in the coming weeks.
All right. One good way in which you might boost growth would be to increase trading with our biggest trade partner, which is the EU. Yeah. There is a thing called the Pan-Euro-Mediterranean Convention, which it is said could make trade not frictionless, but much easier. Are we going to join?
Well, it was really interesting to see Maros Sefcovic this week suggest that Britain might be welcome.
The EU Trade Commissioner.
Yeah, the UK might be welcome in that pan-European and Mediterranean customs framework. And we are absolutely happy to look at these different proposals because we know that the deal that the previous government secured is not working well enough. It's not working well enough for small businesses trying to export. It's not working well enough for larger businesses either. We're grown up to admit that, whereas the previous government said there were no problems at all. And where there are constructive ideas, we are happy to look at those, as long as they're consistent with the red lines that we set out in our manifesto.
So that relationship is something that you will look at positively and seriously?
Yes. Last month, I was the first UK Chancellor to attend the Eurogroup of Finance Ministers meeting in Brussels. That's all about resetting our relationship. You're absolutely right, Trevor. If we want to grow our economy, we've got to boost trade, not just with European countries, but with countries around the world, whether that's the US or fast-growing economies like India, China and the Gulf countries. But we want to do that because it's good for British business and therefore it's good for jobs here in Britain and working people in Britain.
I could pick away at all sorts of individual things, but I want to try and get
an idea. Well, you can see a theme here. We want to grow the economy and go further and faster
that is exactly what I want to do. I want to see if I can sum up the Iron Chancellor's approach to growth. Let me put a quote to you. We must break down the barriers to growth built up in our system over decades. Decisions take too long, burdens on businesses are too high, infrastructure projects get delayed for years and years and years. As a result, we have seen economic growth choked off. Actually, what you've been saying this morning sounds very like that. Would you agree with that?
Well, what I would say is we are doing the things. We're not just talking. Everyone would agree that we need to see economic growth and it's been choked off. The difference between governments of the past and this government is we are doing the practical things, whether it's on regulation, whether it's on planning reform, pensions reform, or indeed boosting trade with our nearest neighbours and trading partners. We're doing practical things to get that growth, not just talking about it.
But you recognise who this comes from, don't you?
I don't know who that's from. I'm saying...
Liz Truss, and it sounds... The message you've given me this morning sounds really familiar.
Apart from Liz Truss and the numerous Conservative Prime Ministers and Chancellors of the last few years didn't do the practical things that were necessary to grow our economy. And that's the difference, because one by one, we're removing the barriers that have stopped businesses from investing for too long in Britain. We're going to turn around this performance. I'm determined to be the Chancellor that brings growth back to the UK economy.
OK. Can I just ask, finally, a personal question? And you must know about this. Does it hurt you to be described as Rachel from accounts?
Well, you know, I've probably been called worse things, Trevor, but I became an MP almost 15 years ago now. Before I became a Member of Parliament, I worked as an economist at the Bank of England, and then I worked in the private sector in financial services for Halifax Bank of Scotland. I'm proud of the jobs that I did before I became a Member of Parliament, but in the end, people are going to judge me on the job that I'm doing now, the job that I'm doing as Chancellor of the Exchequer.
But do you think if you were a bloke, that condescending label would be attached to you?
Well, some people don't want this government to succeed. Some people don't want me to succeed. I've spent my life proving people wrong, proving that I can do stuff that I've been underestimated for. In the end, people will judge me. Can I stabilise the public finances? We've done that. Can I grow the economy? I'm determined to do so.
Rachel Reeves, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.